Namaskar, brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, students and scholars, teachers and trainers, professors, professionals, officers, officials, listeners, and others. I welcome all respected doctors and directors. I welcome all adorable ministers and managers. I welcome all honorable advocates, supervisors, district advisors. I welcome the most honorable President, Mr. Modi ji. Dr. Rakesh from USA, heartily cordially welcome. It's really nice time, nice place, nice section today that we are defining, explaining our holy Indian spiritual cultural land. Dear friends, it is said in all our holy religions of this holy land that nature is the common concept of all holy religions of this holy land. Nature nurtures us like a mother, nature treats us like a doctor, nature teaches us like a teacher. Nature plays multi-dimensional, multi-sided, multifaceted role. It is said in all holy religions of this holy land. In the present sense of mind, we can observe, examine, evaluate the presence of God or God with 100% present sense of mind. Power which is omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent, almighty. He is, he was, he will, he never leave anyone. He never leaves anyone anywhere alone. Because this human body is made by five elements, and these five elements shows the presence of God or God everywhere. Starters, beginners, initiators, creators, generators, operators of all the holy religions of this holy land, explain, define, describe them. He resides in these five elements, even he is the form of ray of light, wave of sound. According to the start of Sikhism, Sri Guru Nanak Dev Ji Maharaj, he explained there is the presence of Lord or God in five elements. Even he resides in ray of light, and where there is no ray of light, he also presents there. It is said by Swami Vivekananda, our holy cultural, spiritual, social, educational teachings, education, it is said that we must observe that power forever, everywhere with us. I belong to God, God belongs to me. It is the ultimate spiritual truth of life, and it's the initial message of spiritualism. It is said in all our holy spiritual scriptures. So let's go further. Yesterday we have defined a topic related to the international law and human rights. Today we will go through nature of state and different kinds of states and non-state identities. State is the main subject of international law. It is very difficult to define the term state, but certain theorists have made their endeavors to this respect. According to Salmon, state is a community of people which has which has been established for some objective such as internal order and external security. In the view of Lawrence, state is a society which is politically organized and its members are bound with each other by being under some central authority, and most of the people automatically follow the rules of this central authority. As pointed out by O'Kane theme, the existence of state is possible only when people of state have settled under highest government authority and habitually follow its orders. According to Professor H.L.E. Hart, the expression a state is a way of referring to two facts. First, that a population inhabiting in a territory live under that form of ordered government provided by a legal system, which is characteristic structure of legislation, laws, and primary rules. And secondly, that the government enjoys a vaguely defined degree of independence. Stark has rightly pointed out that an ideal definition of the term state is not possible. But in the modern period, it is finally settled as to what are the essential elements of state. Essential elements of a state. What are these? According to Article 1 of Montevideo Convention 1933, the state as a person of international law should possess the qualities, qualifications. One is a permanent population, a defined territory, a government, and capacity to enter into relations with other states. Oppenheim has pointed out these essential elements of a state as population, a definite territory, government, and capacity to enter into relation with other states. The famous jurist Holyland has added one more essential element, namely, to some extent, civilization, because of which the state becomes the member of international community. Article 4 of Montevideo Convention on the Rights and Duties of States provide that states are judicially equal and enjoy the same rights and have equal capacity in their exercise. The rights of each one do not depend upon power which it possesses to assure its exercise, but upon the simple fact of existence of a person under international law. Further, Article 6 provides that the recognition of a state merely signifies that the state of which recognizes it accepts the personality of the other with all the rights and duties determined by international law. Recognition is unconditional and irrevocable. What are the functions of state? Modern period has witnessed revolutionary changes in regard to functions of a state. Previously, there was the conception of a police state, according to which the essential functions of a state were to maintain internal peace and order and to defend it from external aggression. It cannot be defined that even today these are the essential functions of a state, but in the present period, the conception of state has undergone significant changes. Instead of conception of police state, the present conception is that of a welfare state. That is to say, for the benefit of the people, state has to perform many social, economic, educational and cultural functions. But these functions do not come under the category of essential functions. They are in fact subsidiary functions. Nevertheless, these are also the functions of a state in the modern time, and the importance of these functions is constantly increasing. What is the concept of sovereignty? In the view of jurists, only sovereign states are entitled to be the members of the family of nations. According to Austin, if a determinate human superior, not in the habit of obedience to a like superior, receive habitual obedience from the bulk of human society, that determinate superior is sovereign in that society, and the society, including determinate superior, is a society, political and independent. In relation between states, sovereignty has been defined by Max Hooper in Island of Palmas Arbitration. In his words, sovereignty in the relation between states signifies independence. Independence in regard to a portion of the global, independence in regard to a portion of the globe is the right to exercise their aid to the exclusion of any other state. The function of a state in the modern period, the credit of propounding the concept of sovereignty goes to John Body. John Body, who in 1576 in his book De Republic has put forward the conception of sovereignty. According to him, the essential element of sovereignty is the law-making power of the sovereign. Since the sovereign makes the law, he does not intend to bind himself by that law. But he hastened to add that the sovereign is, however, bound by the divine law. Slowly and gradually, this concept of sovereignty became distorted and it became synonymous with absolution in 16th century. Hobby expressed that by sovereignty it means the absolute and complete power of the sovereign. It came to be defined as the supreme power over a definite territory, unrestricted by any other power. Every sovereign state can exercise the function of state to the exclusion of all other states. In other words, it exercises complete sovereignty within its territories. Since territories of a state are circumscribed by its boundaries, it has been rightly said. Boundaries are one of the most significant manifestation of state territorial sovereignty. According to Austin, sovereignty is indivisible and illimitable. In international law, of a good example of the application of the principle sovereignty is the theory of auto limitation. According to the theory, states follow international law because they have by their consent reduced their powers. This principle is based on the principle of state sovereignty. The chief exponents of this principle were Angelotti and Tripel. It has been pointed out in an earlier chapter that the theory of auto-limitation suffers from several defects and does not appear to be correct. It has been severely criticized by many jurists in the modern period. There have been revolutionary changes in respect of the theory of sovereignty of states. In the present time, it is not proper to say that state sovereignty is indivisible and limitable. Ordinarily, over one and the same territory, there can be only one sovereign in practice. However, there can be several exceptions, such as one is the first and probably the only real exception is the condominium which exists between two or more states exercising sovereignty jointly over a territory. For example, condominium of Austria and Prussia over Schleswig-Holstein Länder from 1864 till 1866, condominium of Great Britain and Egypt over Sudan from 1898 to 1955, and condominium of Great Britain and France over the New Hebrides, now the independent state of Vanuatu can be cited as example. Two is one state exercising sovereignty which is in law vested elsewhere. For example, where a territory is administered by a foreign power with the consent of the owner state. For example, Great Britain exercised sovereignty over Turkish island from 1878 to 1914. The third exception is that of giving territory on lease or pledged by the owner state to be a foreign power. For example, in 1998, China leased the district of Yakov to Germany. Well Highway and the land opposite the island of Hong Kong to Great Britain, Chuan to France and Port Arthur to Russia. For is where the use, occupation and control of the territory are granted in perpetuity by the grantor state to the other state. For example, in 1900C, the Republic of Panama transferred to the United States of America a 10-mile territory for construction, administration and defense of the Panama Canal. Follows the next exception is that of a federal state because sovereignty is divided between a federal state and its member states. The last exception is that of a mandated or trust territory. The state which is given a mandate or a trust territory exercises sovereignty over it, although The territory nor its on the present in the present time, states have accepted many restrictions under international treaties and in international institutions whereby they have impliedly surrendered a part of their sovereignty. For example, the members of the United Nations and International Labour Organization have accepted many obligations because of which their sovereignty has ceased to be limitable and indivisible. Thus, sovereignty has a much restricted meaning today than in 18th and 19th century, when, with the emergence of powerful, highly nationalized states, few limits on states' autonomy were acknowledged. At the present time, there is hardly a state in the interest of the international community has not accepted restrictions on its liberty of action. Thus, most states are members of the United Nations and the International Labour Organization (ILO), in relation to which they have undertaken obligations limiting their unfettered discretion in matters of international policy. Therefore, it is probably more accurate today to say that the sovereignty of a state means the regime of power which it possesses within the confines laid down by international law. Just Ledpech has also rightly remarked, international law, whether codified or not, implies essentially a restriction of the sovereignties of states whose relationship governs. Though this is true, even new states do not accept this sound proposition in theory as well as practice. There is much force in the following words of Professor Edward Hambro. In the word of the 20th century, no frontal attack on national sovereignty will avail. The charter is based on the sovereign equality of the members. But this is very important indeed. No rule prevents the states from disposing of part of their freedom of action for the common good. Sovereignty has been defined as the supreme authority in an independent political society. It is essential, individual, and limitable. However, as remarked by Savyasti Mukherjee, CJ Union of India versus Sukumar Sen-Gupta, it is now considered and accepted as both divisible and limitable, and we must recognize that it should be so. Sovereignty is limited extremely by the possibility of general resistance. Internal sovereignty is paramount power over all actions within and is limited by the nature of power itself. His Lordship quoted this approval the above mentioned passage from Stark's book and observed any state in the modern time has to acknowledge and accept customary restraints on its sovereignty in as much as no state can exist independently and without reference to other states. Under the general international law, international the concept of interdependence of states has come to be accepted. Further, the complexity of modern developed societies need peaceful coexistence if the world is to survive. Amicable and peaceful settlement of boundary disputes are in the interest of international community. The older and absolute ideas of sovereignty and independence has thus necessarily to be modified in the dawn of the 21st century. It may be noted that the word today, that is in 1994, bears little resemblance to the word of 1945 and when the UN system was set up. A recent study, Tomorrow's United Nations, has pointed out We live in a period when governments, the basic units of the UN system, have less and less control over the forces that are shaping the future. Nationalism and sovereignty are increasingly problematic concepts. Their relationship to international responsibility and to the realities and hard facts of contemporary life are inevitably changing. Since the Gulf War, 1991 attempts have been made to bring about changes in the traditional concept of national sovereignty. Being encouraged by the United Nations intervention on behalf of the Kurdish people of Iran, several Western countries have expressed the view in the last session of the General Assembly that internal disorder and violations of human rights by governments should warrant collective international action through the United Nations. France went a step ahead and suggested that the Charter of the United Nations be amended to accommodate the ambitious activist role of the world body. But this newfound enthusiasm for the UN as an agent of collective security in the quicksilver of shifting international relations is being viewed with alarm by developing countries including India and China. Both India and China did their best to dissuade the Security Council from passing a resolution allowing the Security Council interference in the civil war in Yugoslavia under the reasoning that it was a threat to international peace and security. In his address to the UN General Assembly, Mr. Roland Dunes, Foreign Minister of France, cited the example of the UN intervention on behalf of the Kurdish people and said that every people that requested the right to self-determination and sovereignty were entitled to it so long as they did it through forms like UN. He added that the European community had showed that lasting peace could be established only through the sharing of national sovereignty. The developing countries, however, view with alarm and fear this newfound enthusiasm of the Western countries for the activist role of UN because, in their view, and rightly too, the new ideas contains too many elements from the concept of empire and its mission of civilization, the colonized world. Thus, the traditional concept of national sovereignty is under a serious strain. It is in the interest of the developing countries to wish to watch and respond continuously the new ideas relating to sovereignty, especially the enthusiasm for activist role of the UN in respect of human rights. Principle of the equality of states as the members of the international community in principle, all states are equal. This equality is due to their international personality, despite the dissimilarity in respect of their territory, population, power, civilization, prosperity, etc. All states as international persons are equal according to Oppenheim. These are the consequences of this legal equality. When any question is to be decided by consent, each state is entitled to have one vote. But there are exceptions to this rule, such as the veto of the permanent members of the Security Council, who is legally the importance of the votes of the weak as well as strong nation is same. There are some exceptions of this rule also. Says no state can exercise jurisdiction over another state. The courts have enforced this rule in many cases, such as Duff Development Company Limited versus Government of Galantan, the Parliament Belch, Michelle and Sultan of Johor, D. Haber versus the Queen of Portugal, the Exchange versus McFadden, Westward and Cook and the Constitution. For this, generally the courts of a state cannot challenge the validity of the official acts of another state so far as these acts are related to the jurisdiction of that state. M. Luther Company versus Sagor versus and Company, Russian Commercial and Industrial Bank versus Composite as Complete Banco International versus Oxo and Underhill versus Hernandez business mentioned in this connection. Although in principle all states are equal, in reality they are not equal. They are unequals in respect of their irrespective power, territory, property, etc. The UN Charter is based on the principle of sovereign equality of states, but as pointed out by B.A. Sorokin in reality, great powers are unequal to small states and legally also because they possess the power of veto under the Charter. Thus, the equality of states is generally general principle, but there are several important exceptions of this principle. A significant departure from the principle of equality was made under the covenant of the League of Nations. It manifested itself in the composition of the Council and to some extent in the principles relating to the membership of the governing body of the International Labour Organization. The principle of the sovereign equality of its members constitutes a significant landmark in the gradual modification of the traditional doctrine of the equality of states, while the principle of equality of states has been strictly adhered to in the composition of the General Assembly. It has been greatly diluted in the composition of the Security Council. The principle of sovereign equality of states has also been modified significantly in the Constitution of the World Bank. International Monetary Fund and some other specialized agencies, the principle of sovereign equality of state under the UN Charter has been discussed in a little greater detail under the heading Principle of the UN under the chapter of entitled Purposes, Principles, Membership, etc. of the UN. What are the rights and duties of states? The doctrine of basic or fundamental rights and duties was enunciated by the naturalist writer. India views the doctrine of fundamental rights and duties on its existence to the law of nature. There are certain rights which are inherent in the very nature of states and may, therefore, be regarded as the fundamental rights of states. As pointed out by Oppenheim, until the last 2 decades of the 19th century, there was general agreement that membership of the international community restored so-called fundamental rights of state. Such rights were chiefly enumerated as the rights of existence of self, preservation of equality of independence to territorial supremacy, of holding and requiring territory, of intercourse, and of good name and reputation was maintained that these fundamental rights are matter of course and self-evident since the community of nations consists of sovereign states. But no unanimity existed with regard to the number, the appellation and the contents of these alleged fundamental rights. Further, they are rights and duties which do not arise from treaties between states, but which the states customarily enjoy and are subject to simply as international persons, and which they grant the receive reciprocally as members of the community of nations. It may be noted here that the theory of fundamental rights has been subjected to severe criticism. According to the positivist writers, there are no fundamental or inherent rights and duties of states. The rights so referred are not inherent but have arisen out of historical development and their growth can be traced. They also contend that the distinction between the fundamental and non-fundamental rights and duties of states is unjustified. Rights and duties of the states are in fact the rights and duties which have been recognized by the community of states. Although there is much force in the above criticism, it cannot be accepted as a whole, whether we call them basic or fundamental. There seems to be a general consensus in respect of certain rights and duties. Some of the more important of such rights include: one is sovereignty and independence of states, two is equality of states, is territorial jurisdiction, and four is right to self-defense and self-preservation. So is the case with certain duties, which include duty not to resort to war, to fulfill treaty obligations in good faith, and the duty of non-intervention. At present, sovereignty is deemed neither to be neither individual nor unlimited in the interest of international community and on the basis of reciprocal rights and duties. No state can now claim absolute sovereignty. Independence of states denotes certain rights, powers, and privileges under international law. Some of the rights associated with the independence of a state are power exclusively to control its own domestic affairs, power to admit or expel aliens, privileges and immunities of diplomatic envoys in other states, and exclusive jurisdiction over crimes committed its territory. Certain duties are also associated with the independence of states. The duty not to perform act of sovereignty on the territory of another state, duty not to allow in its territory preparations which are prejudicial to the security of another state, duty not to intervene in the affairs of another state, etc. are such duties. Several efforts have been made to formulate and codify rights and duties of states. Some of the more important efforts which deserve a special mention are Declaration of Rights and Duties of Nations proclaimed by the American Institute of International Law in 1916, Montevideo Convention Montevideo Convention of 1933 relating to the rights and duties of states, and the Bogota Charter of the Organization of American States of 1948, which includes the chapter on fundamental rights and duties of states. Besides this, in 1947, the International Law Commission prepared a draft declaration of rights and duties of states on the basis of a proposal made by Panama. The General Assembly transmitted it to the member states of the UN for their consideration. It is significant to note that the draft included 14 basic articles incorporating certain traditional rights such as independence, territorial jurisdiction, equality, and individual and collective self-defense, and duties such as non-intervention, not to commit civil strike in another state's territory, not to do anything in its territory which endanger international peace and security, not to resort to war or use force or to make a threat thereof against the territorial integrity or political independence of another state or in any manner inconsistent with international law, including the Charter of the UN, to settle international disputes peacefully and ensure respect for and observance of human rights and fundamental freedoms without distinction as to race, sex, language, or religion in its territory and jurisdiction. The draft declaration has yet not been adopted. And therefore doubts have been expressed with respect of its general application and validity. As pointed out by Rosalind Higgins, on occasions, United Nations organization may pass resolutions deliberately declaratory of existing law one way, cite for example General Assembly Resolution 375 for its the Declaration on Rights and Duties of States though in the event this particular declaration was not in fact adopted. It covers certain traditional rights and duties in 14 basic articles ranging from jurisdiction to intervention to sovereign equality. Although the General Assembly is not a legislative body, the adoption of the adoption of such a the adoption of such a type of resolution by an overwhelming majority or by Welcome to rock music. Bluetooth mode. How proteins are being tweaked to the quantum sensors inside the body. Most existing quantum sensors are made from solid materials such as diamond, which are difficult to place inside cells. However, cells can produce proteins naturally with the correct genetic instructions and they can also be fused to other proteins, allowing researchers to position them at precise locations inside body. For decades, fluorescent proteins have been among the most powerful tools in biology. They glow when illuminated, allowing scientists to see where molecules are inside cells and how they move from the tracking cancer cells to mapping natural circuits with luminous markers. These luminous markers transformed the life sciences, work recognized with the Nobel Prize in 2008. Now, two major studies published in Nature suggest that fluorescent proteins can do more than glow. Certain fluorescent proteins can be modified to detect magnetic fields and radio waves from inside living cells. In effect, they behave as quantum sensors devices whose operation depends on the behavior of electrons at the smallest scale. Until recently, quantum technologies were confined to ultra cold laboratories filled with specialized equipment. Biology, by contrast, has been viewed as an unlikely home for quantum efforts. For quantum effects, living cells are warm, crowded, and constantly in motion. Conditions thought to destroy fragile quantum states. The new results challenge that assumption, opening a path towards generally encoded quantum sensors and a new class of hybrid quantum biological technology. But our hidden sensitivity, when our fluorescent proteins absorbs light, one of its electrons is pushed into a higher energy state. Usually, the electron quickly returns to its original state and releases energy as light. That simple process is what makes the protein glow. In some proteins, however, this journey is more complicated. The excited electron can briefly interact with a nearby molecule inside the protein, forming what scientists call a radical pair. Two molecules that each carry unpaired electron. For a short time, the spins of these electrons are linked. The outcome of their interaction depends on weak magnetic influences around them. Even weak magnetic fields can change how the pair behave, which in turn alters how much light the protein emits. Chemists have known about this effect for decades, and it has been proposed as a possible explanation for how some animals sense Earth's magnetic field, but had been missing was a way to reliably harness this phenomenon inside living cells. Protein sensors researchers at the University of Chicago's Pritzker School of Molecular Engineering focused on a variant of enhanced yellow fluorescent protein, a close relative of green fluorescent protein. They discovered that EYFP possesses a stable triplet state, a temporary electronic configuration in which an electron's magnetic spin can be isolated and controlled. Using carefully timed laser pulses, the team initialized the spin state of EYFP, manipulated it with microwave fields, and read it out optically, completing a full sequence required of a qubit. They also detected optically driven magnetic resonance signals from EYFP inside living cells. These effects appeared in human kidney cells at low temperature and in Escherichia coli bacteria even at room temperature, showing that the protein's quantum behavior survives in biology noisy environment. The second research group at the University of Oxford took a different approach. Working with a plant light sensing protein, they use genetic engineering to create a family of magnetosensitive fluorescent proteins called MAGLOW. Through repeated rounds of mutation and selection, they produce a version with stronger and more stable magnetic responses. The researchers showed that MAGLOW proteins exhibit optically detected magnetic resonance in living bacterial cells at room temperature. In other words, radio waves at specific frequencies can predictably change fluorescence, directly revealing electron spin behavior. Historically, biological candidates for quantum sensors were limited to purified. In vitro systems showed weak responses or degraded quickly under light exposure. The engineered background proteins overcome many of these obstacles by combining stability, sensitivity, and genetic compatibility. Together, the studies demonstrate that proteins can be programmed through DNA to act as quantum sensors. Why inside cells matter? Most existing quantum sensors are made from solid materials such as diamond. These devices can be extraordinarily sensitive, but they are difficult to place inside cells or attach to specific biological targets. Protein sensors are fundamentally different. Cells can produce them naturally once given the correct genetic instructions. The sensors can also be fused to other proteins, allowing researchers to position them at precise locations inside the cell. This matters because many crucial biological processes involve subtle magnetic or electronic effects, including enzyme reactions with metal atoms, formation of short-lived free radicals, and electron transfer during respiration and photosynthesis. Until now, studying these phenomena inside living cells has been nearly impossible. Protein-based quantum sensors offer a potential solution more than detection. The maglev researchers also showed the magnetic modulation can improve conventional fluorescence imaging by switching a magnetic field on and off. The separated the maglev signal from background fluorescence and several autofluorescence. This technique known as block-in detection enhance weak signals in noisy environment. They further demonstrated a form of spatial localization based on magnetic resonance using magnetic field gradients. They could determine the position of maglev expressing cells within a three-dimensional sample even when light scattering would normally blur the image. The approach resembles some principles of magnetic resonance image, but uses generally but uses genetically encoded fluorescent proteins as a signal source. New ways of seeing these studies point to a future in which genetically encodable quantum sensors reshape how scientists probe living systems. As sensitivities improve, protein-based qubits and magnetic resonance probes could enable nanoscale measurements of magnetic fields, electric fields, temperature, and chemical environments directly inside cells. Such sensors might track protein shape changes, monitor biochemical reactions in real time, or reveal how drugs bind to their targets with unprecedented precision. Important challenges remain, though protein-based quantum sensors are currently less sensitive than solid-state devices. Coherence times are shorter, and photobleaching remains a concern yet. Fluorescent proteins themselves took decades to become routine tools, and similar improvement could steadily close the gap. Hope, hope IPL experience will help advantage in Ahmedabad. Betting coach Yadav wants Lankan batters to be clinical. Sri Lanka is a very strong side at home. Americans, New Zealand skipper Ken Santana, Pakistan appoints Fibers as its new head coach. Brooks' special knock carried England into the semi-finals. The skipper's sensational 100 paves the way for a thrilling two-wicket win. Pakistan hopes of advancing to the knockout phase, hanging by a thread. Farhan and Afridi's efforts could win. Samson's long next session is sign of India's top order raising. They are not going to hold back in by coach Salman's blesses for India Test from Mumbai. Sri Lanka didn't maintain a crucial fixture from Pellegrini. India over run continues as it lost and it loses in shootout to Spain from Hobart. Buckner regrets wrong decision against Tendulkar from New Delhi. More than 2 decades after making what was then widely seen as dreadful decision against Sachin Tendulkar, respected umpire Steve Buckner has finally expressed regrets and accepted that it was a mistake. India's Nagaland Dhamne advance from Sports Bureau. Gardner Money Star as Australia draws first blood from Brisbane. Nominees for Sporting Moment of the Year from Sports Bureau. Pandit and Yavar helped J&K take first day honors against Karnataka from Hubli. I remain positive and played my national game, Yavar says from Hubli. Mumbai, Rajasthan starts strong in 72nd 72 the lead from Gurugram. World champion Mukesh Aid his first success of the year from Prague. Super Sub Sesko emerges the hero for Man United from Liverpool. Real Madrid coach Arbeloa wants UEFA to clamp down on racism from Madrid, Odisha and M. Prakash failed to break deadlock from Bhubaneswar. May Weather and Pekwa agree to a rematch in September from Los Angeles. Report expands judicial team to end Bengal SIR process. Benches judges can be brought from neighboring Odisha and Jharkhand. If needed, the move follows Calcutta High Court Chief Justice flagging lakhs of water claims and objections in the state from this from New Delhi. Supreme Court expands judicial team to end Bengal SIR process. Bench says judges can be borrowed from neighboring Odisha and Jharkhand if needed. The move follows Calcutta High Court Chief Justice flagging lakhs of water claims and objections in the state from New Delhi.